Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. I'm George Conning with Scratch Golf Tips, and today we're going to be talking about par threes. Most specifically, should we be teeing the ball up with an iron in hand on par threes, or should we be keeping the ball on the ground? Now, there are obviously pros and cons to both sides, but we can definitely answer the question depending on what type of golfer you are. To get the most pertinent thing out of the way, if you are a beginner golfer, if you're still working on hitting the ball more often, if you're having trouble making consistent strikes with the ball, say you're shooting in the hundreds, you're a 20 or handicap or above, the answer is almost always yes. You want to tee the ball up, especially on par threes. Simply put, if you tee the ball up, you have the best lie possible. If the ball is above the ground on a tee peg, there are no obstructions to the ball, you have your best lie. So if you have the opportunity to give yourself the best lie possible, it's one of the only times you can do so, why wouldn't you take it? Jack Nicklaus, who is famous for hitting irons off the tee, especially some of his more famous ones throughout the majors in the 60s and 70s, said if you have the opportunity to do it, why wouldn't you? And for almost any golfer, it makes complete sense to tee the ball up. Now, it is important to note when I say tee the ball up, I'm not saying have the ball 4 inches off the ground, but I sometimes play with individuals who will tee the ball barely off the ground, where it's basically making no difference, and that's fine for wedges. If you're hitting into a 110-yard par 3 and you have a 52-degree wedge, I totally get that. But if we're saying you have an 180-yard hole, you want to hit a 6-iron, it makes sense to have that a half inch or maybe a full inch off the ground, just so it's completely unobstructed. The benefits are it's very easy to make solid contact with the ball because if you're a little bit behind the ball on your low point control, meaning your club bottoms out but then comes back up, you can get away with it if your ball is maybe an inch off the ground, because there won't be any dirt or grass directly below that ball. So hitting it fat is much more difficult to do, which means that's a very good thing for us. Now, having your ball teed up on a par 3 really doesn't make any difference for when you hit a thin shot. The only difference that it would make is having that ball teed up a little bit higher could potentially eliminate a thin shot because that ball is higher up. If the ball was on the ground and you were to hit the equator of the ball, then having the ball slightly higher off the ground means the equator would be below the ball. So while it won't guarantee you to not hit thin shots, it could help if you do struggle with thin shots when the ball is on the ground. And another huge benefit to teeing the ball up that we kind of have to work around when hitting from fairways and rough and dirt and pine straw, whatever may be out there, is you're basically guaranteed a clean strike at the ball, meaning that there are no obstructions between the club face and the ball itself. Even if you have a decent lie in a tall fairway or the rough, there's going to be grass that gets between the club face and the ball. If you hit a long shot, you might see some marks on your ball. You certainly see a little bit of dirt or a little bit of grass or maybe rocks on your club face. That is basically eliminated before you strike the ball. Obviously, when you look down at your club after hitting a 7-iron off the tee, you're likely going to see some dirt in there because you hit the ground after the ball if you have proper downward compression to the ball. But that clean contact is very useful for par 3s because if there's nothing between ball and club face, it makes it much easier to control the spin and the ball flight of your ball. As a reminder, spin is created when the golf ball lodges into the grooves of the golf club. So if there's grass between ball and club face, that ball can't really get into the grooves, it can't generate spin. That's why when you hit the ball out of the rough, you almost never get backspin even if you hit it pretty solidly. But having no obstruction between ball and club face makes it very easy to get more spin and control that spin. So if you are hitting a 7-iron into a green, you'll see some check. That ball will land softly, it'll have a little bit of backspin. I'm not saying it'll completely suck back, but it'll land a lot more softly. You can also control your fading and drawing the ball much better off the tee because, again, you're guaranteed pretty solid contact if you have decent low control over the club. Now, to address a situation where we might not want to use a tee, or a tee can actually be to our detriment, is like I mentioned earlier. When you're hitting your wedges or even a 9 or 8-iron, you don't want that ball teed up too high because those clubs will inherently send the ball very high. Your wedges have higher loft. They're going to go naturally higher. So if you tee that ball up a full inch and you hit a 52-degree wedge, that ball is going to go too high. There is absolutely such a thing as hitting the ball too high, especially if you have a lot of backspin. That ball will get caught up. If there's wind, that ball will get caught up. So What I like to do, even with wedges, is I will put a T-peg in the ground, and I'll just put it barely above the ground just to ensure a little bit more cleanliness. I don't have to get between any dirt, any grass, especially when you're playing on, we don't always play on TPC sawgrass every week. So if you have a little bit of a fluffier T-peg, that can absolutely help. Just don't make it so that you're hitting the ball too high. We don't want to be teeing the ball an inch high with a sand wedge, for instance. So I hope this did provide some clarity for everyone on using a T-peg on a par 3, when to use it, when not to, and even some insights on how high you should use the T-pegs. If you have any further thoughts, questions, or comments on what I've mentioned in this video, leave them in the comment section down below. I read and reply to all comments on these YouTube videos. If you'd like to see more content like this, feel free to subscribe to the Scratch Golf Tips YouTube channel. That helps me see what kind of content you are all enjoying. It also helps YouTube show this type of content to more people who will find it helpful. Thank you all very much for watching. Play well and take care.